For the past couple of weeks, we've been following Mark's gospel. We've been hearing stories that center around Jesus in the Sea of Galilee. He's on one side of the Sea of Galilee, and he's speaking to a great crowd of people, and he talks about the sower. Then the following week, we moved on to the next story in Mark. Jesus breaks away from that crowd of people, and he gets on a boat with his disciples, and he goes out to sea, and there's this great storm. Jesus is sleeping in the boat, and the disciples say, don't you even care that we're about to drown? And Jesus calms the storm. So today's story comes just a little bit later in the next chapter of Mark. Jesus gets back in the boat, and he goes back to the other side. And it is here the crowd gathers around him again. And then as he's moving, he feels a sense, something happens, and he sees this woman. And we don't find out her name, but he looks at her and he says, "Your faith has healed you." She had had this illness. The Bible calls it a hemorrhage. She had been bleeding for 12 years, and she had exhausted all other options. She had seen all of the experts, consulted all of the doctors, and she had spent everything she had trying to find a cure for this illness, but still it came on. It affected her life. It cut her off from her community. It prevented her from doing the things that she wanted to do and being with the people that she loved in the way that she wanted to do it. And so in an act of desperation, she says to herself, if I could only just touch the hem of his robe, I could be healed. And this woman touches Jesus' robe, and then something happens. She realizes immediately that she's been healed. She feels it in her body, and she jumps back. And not only is she healed physically, but there's a sense of a wholeness being restored to her life. Jesus calls her daughter and in a way restores her to this position, this place in society, this place in relationship to those people around her that she had been lacking. What really occurs to me more than anything is this idea of this person taking agency over their own life and reaching out desperately even to God, and God reaching back. It is not my place to mansplain to you the experience of a woman, either then in those days or certainly not today in our modern era. So I have consulted some voices of women who have written about some of these issues, and I'm going to share some of that today, and I'll encourage you to read some more on your own. I am here to, at the very least, just say that you are seen and you are heard and you are valuable and you are loved. And I'm here also to speak to those people like myself who identify as men who have lived a different experience. So I want to start today by speaking of the work of a psychologist. Her name is Vicki Helgeson. She's at Carnegie Mellon University. And her expertise and her study has been particularly how gender affects how people deal with chronic illness. And she has found in her research that our socialization, especially along gender lines, as we grow up, the examples that we are given, the examples of the adults in our lives and the people around us, what we hear from society, does have an influence actually in how people deal with chronic illness in their lives, much as this woman in our story was dealing with. And she, in articulating these differences, has identified two phrases, one that she calls unmitigated agency, and the other one, unmitigated communion. Now, unmitigated agency, she says, is most often found in men. It is a focus on the self to the exclusion of others. Unmitigated communion, which is most often found in people who identify themselves as women, is a focus on others to the exclusion of the self. Now, again, I do want to point out that what Dr. Helgeson is telling us is that not that men are naturally more inclined to be more concerned with the self, or that women are more naturally inclined to be concerned with others and with their family, but they've been socialized to do these things and to think these things and to interpret their own self-identity through these concepts. A woman who is critically ill will often try to continue to care for her family, even at the cost of caring for herself. Women today are certainly more socialized to have more agency, says Dr. Hugelson, and be more assertive, but not at the expense of giving up that other orientation. I've experienced this in my own life. In fact, I'm ashamed to say that I'm growing more and more aware of it. It's not something that I have been aware of necessarily. My wife is a very strong person. She's very motivated and successful, and she works so hard. And she also bears a lot of the burden of the care at home. I'm confessing that to you because I know that's a place that me as a man who has been socialized to perhaps be a little bit more self-centered is lacking in my care for her. So I realized in our room where our family watches television, we have a couch that the three boys sit on. And then we have two chairs that my wife and I each sit on. We have a comfy chair and an uncomfy chair. I don't know why we just don't get another comfy chair, but that's where we are. My wife would just sort of offer me the comfy chair. And I wasn't, in my mind, being selfish, but I would say, oh, well, are you sure you want to sit there? I'll sit there. And then I realized, well, that's not right. I shouldn't always have the comfy chair. And so I began asking her, would you like to sit in the comfy chair? And she would say, no, go ahead. That's all right. I don't care. So I sit in the comfy chair. But even then, even that wasn't enough, because I realized that was something she was doing in every aspect of our life. She was saying, no, that's okay. You take that. I don't care. And so at one point when I think I was preparing dinner and I asked her if she would want this. I think the situation was that there was just a little bit of this food left over. And I said, well, there's not enough for all of us. Would you like this? And she said, no, you and the boys take that. And I said to her, well, are you saying that because you truly don't want it for yourself? Or are you just saying what you will accept in order for the rest of us to be happy? And then, or since that moment, I've tried to ask myself that question. Is she saying that because she's truly communicating what it is that she wants? Is she really telling me what her needs are? Or is she just telling me what she is willing to accept in order for the rest of us to be happy? Author Alex Elle, who recently released a book called After the Rain, which is a wonderful book, she says that in her early 20s, she began thinking about self-care as a practice. She saw around her women breaking their backs, working hard, giving and giving and giving and giving, and having nothing left for themselves. And she realized that this was a pattern that she had to break, not only for her own benefit, but for the benefit of her daughters. For her, self-care meant becoming self-aware and self-soothing. You see, she was taught by watching the adults in her life to hide, to be fearful, to be unhappy. And yet she was also taught to put on a smile. Right. And so she took this idea of self-awareness, of self-care, and she made it a spiritual and a very real practice in her life to seek out knowing herself and what she needed, and to be very honest about those things, not just with herself, but with her partner and with her children, so that her children would realize that there's no such thing as this perfect person. There's no such thing as this perfect woman. Alex Elle believes that self-care is community care. She says the filling up of self so that we can pour into others and not be depleted is self-care. This idea that we have this reservoir, this tank that we empty into other people, that we pour out in our caring of those people. And women, or those who identify as women in our society, have been socialized and taught from their very earliest age to keep pouring and to keep pouring and to keep pouring out until there is nothing left. And Alex Elle tells us that it is impossible at some point to continue to care for others when that tank gets depleted. She says that women are often taught to be strong, to be the strong one, the caretaker. and with a smile on your face, and even though you've got nothing in the tank. She refers to this as a generational hurt, something that she has been passed down from her mother and from her mother and her mother, who always worked hard. She talks about how her grandmother, in fact, was encouraged not to take care of herself all her life, that she was supposed to take care of those around her. Alex talked to her mother at one point and told her that she didn't feel like she grew up in a loving household. And her mother, who was hurt by those words, of course, but said she understood them, she said, "It's hard to feel like you come from a loving home when all the women in your life were just trying to survive. All you saw was survival. You didn't see joy." Now, in this story that we have, the woman has so much faith that she reaches out to Jesus and she touches the hem of her robe, and that faith heals her of these wounds. Some of the damage that the preaching of this story has done in the past is that we're led to have this expectation that if we are not healed, then our faith wasn't strong enough. But that's not really, I think, what this story is about. This story is about a feminist hero from centuries ago who was self-aware, who was taking control of her life. Sarah J. Robinson is an author. She's a youth pastor and a blogger. And her book is called "I Love Jesus, But I Want to Die." And she wrote that at one point when she was particularly struggling with depression, she was alone in her car and she was thinking about this struggle and how hard it was, and that her world just felt like darkness sometimes. And this darkness was chronic for her. She felt like it would never leave. And so she asked God, "Will I always be in this darkness?" And she believes that God said to her, "The darkness may always be there, but I will always be there in the darkness." We all deal with chronic issues in our lives. Some of these are deep-seated, that come from our childhood, that are socialized by our time in this society. I do want to say to those men out there who are like me, who find that we are socialized in a very different way, that care for the women in our lives is so extremely important. And it takes self-awareness on our part as well. It takes examining ourselves, looking at our motivations and our reasoning. We can't be truly supportive partners until we are capable of knowing ourselves in this moment. That is our chronic condition for many of us. But in all of the darkness of our lives, God promises to be there with us. There may be darkness, but God is there with you in that darkness. I'd encourage you over the next few weeks to take some time for yourself. Take some time perhaps for some mindfulness exercises, or to read something that you love. I know that this is not a cure for your chronic condition necessarily, but maybe you can take just a little bit of control. Maybe you can take back just a little bit of your own self-awareness and self-direction. And in that moment, reach out to God, realizing that just in the agency that you have and the ability you have to reach out lies the true power to change your life. And remember that God is there with you. Amen.